Thank you, Rabbi Parker. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.
If you haven't picked it up, we have a bunch in the back over here. We've got the Chamesh Megillot. And Shir Hashirim can be found, we're beginning on page 5. Yeah, this is a fascinating text. It is a book of love poetry. It's a book of erotic love poetry. It is not G-rated. It's probably not even PG-rated. This is pretty wild stuff. And every time it comes up, we find ourselves, or I find myself asking a couple of sort of related questions. One, why are we reading this at Passover? And two, why is this in the Bible at all? This is quite the text to make it in there. And the rabbis ask the same question. They say, what on earth is this doing in here? Probably the easiest, simplest, likeliest answer is that it is beautiful. It was put into the Bible because it is a beautiful text, and someone looked at it and said, this seems inspired. This seems to be filled with the Spirit of God, and I want it in my collection. I want it in my set of holy texts. The rabbis take it in a little different direction, though. They turned it into a metaphor. They say this is a metaphor of the human divine experience. Specifically, this is a metaphor of God and the Jewish people and our relationship to each other. So what looks like love poetry between a young man and a young woman is in fact an expression of divine love. Well, that works to tame the text. That works to move things into more familiar category. And in fact, the rabbis go a little further and say that this is an expression of divine love specific to Passover, specific to the Exodus from Egypt. We see in chapter 1 a reference to Pharaoh's chariot, and they say, okay, so this is about the love that God has for the Jewish people at the moment of the splitting of the sea, the moment of the Exodus from Egypt. The rabbis have a tendency to try to make things univocal, to make things all with one eye, all with one lens, pointing to the Torah, pointing to the Exodus from Egypt. It's possible, it is also just as possible that this is speaking to some other divine experience, a divine experience found in every day, a divine experience found in the love of a young boy and a young girl. It has nothing to do with the Exodus from Egypt. It has nothing to do with the Torah. It is simply part of the ongoing human experience. But if you do, as the rabbis do, make this part of the Torah, part of the Exodus from Egypt, part of the splitting of the sea, you have tamed the text, but you have also introduced a fascinating element into our understanding of God, our understanding of the divine and the divine relationship, which is now described as this quite erotic love poetry. And you have to ask yourself, what does this mean? How do I understand this? How am I supposed to understand this metaphor? And so I hope that I can ask all of you right now to draw on an experience. I don't know all of your stories. You don't know my story. We know each other a little bit, but there are plenty of things we don't know about each other. But I assume most of you can remember being 14, 15, 16, and having that first love. And maybe your first love loved you back. And maybe you can remember that feeling of waking up in the morning and saying, I have a boyfriend. I have a girlfriend. Do you remember the fire in your heart? Do you remember the way your blood pumped? Do you remember the way you didn't quite understand what was happening? But it seemed like things were coming together. It seemed like things were making sense in a new way. You weren't a kid anymore. Now you're going to be a grown-up. You're going to be in love. The rest of the world doesn't understand, but you understand. You're feeling something so big, it's like no one ever felt it before. And that is the love that God has for us. It is not the button-down, three-piece suit country club affection. The love that God has for us is the fiery love of a teenager who has never loved before, and suddenly the world is brighter, suddenly the world is newer. And so as we read these first few chapters, I hope we can draw on that energy. I hope we can remember that fiery, passionate love that God has for us, that we can take it in to this springtime season, that we can remember that we are still in the springtime of our love, of our relationship between God and the Jewish people, between God and us as individuals. And that love isn't boring, it isn't staid, it isn't quiet, it is the most passionate love that the world has ever seen. And so with that, we'll turn to page 5 and we'll begin reading the Song of Songs, Shir Hashirim.